Hello, welcome to the Our Knits podcast. My name is Katie. I'm coming to you from Long Island, New York, where I live with my partner and our two cats, Whiskey and Emma Louise, our crested gecko Scully, and our betta fish Bippity. I believe this is episode 11 of the Our Knits podcast. I'd have to check on that. It's been a very long time since I've filmed. It's been, I believe, over a year now. So as you can see, if you've watched the podcast before, again, this is a new location. I've moved again since the filming of the last podcast, which was last October, I believe. So October 2017. We are now in November of 2018. So please bear with me with the lighting and stuff. Not a whole lot of lighting here. I am filming in my bedroom, which has this lovely dark blue wall behind me, so I'm not sure if it's working or not working, but it's what I've got to work with right now at the moment. So I just kind of wanted to film probably a short episode just to kind of catch up a little bit. It's been far too long, so I just wanted to show some of the things that I've been knitting. I've not been knitting a whole lot in the past year, but I have knit some projects here and there that I didn't even make Ravelry project pages for, which is unheard of for me. I always do that, so I do need to get these guys up on Ravelry. But I thought I'd talk about some knits. Oh, and you can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram as @arrowknits, and you can find me on Ravelry as knitmusic. There is an Our Knits podcast Ravelry group, but it's not been active for some time now. I'm hoping that once I get this episode up onto YouTube, I can hopefully put some show notes over on the Ravelry page as I used to, so that people can reference the patterns and yarns and all the goodies that I'm talking about. So yeah, let's get right into it. I guess we'll do finish objects first. I'm not totally winging this. I did write down the pattern names and yarns that I'm using because they've been so far in between that sometimes I can't really remember what the exact names of everything was. So I did write those down, but besides that, I'm just totally winging it. So I guess we'll do finish objects first. And this is a year's worth of finish objects, but don't get too excited because it's like 3 or 4 items. Let's see. So I've got a couple things here. Actually, one of them is not knitting. One of them is a weaving project, but that counts, right? I can count that for FOs. The first one I'm going to show you is a project that I knit for a gift for a friend. And Sarah, if you're watching this and I haven't seen you recently, just fast forward, turn it off, stop listening to my voice because I'm about to show something that is for you that I really need to give to you before your gorgeous son gets any bigger and can't fit into it. So, Sarah, turn it off. I guess I'll show you the back first because the back is cuter. So, this is the newborn vertebrae pattern. It's a free pattern on Ravelry. This is actually the back. I'll show you the front of it. It's an open front cardigan. So there are no sides to this. It's just a band, a neck band. And as you can see, my neck band is very slight, and I'll get into that in a minute. I knit this with Knit Picks Felici, and this is in the Time Traveler colorway, which is no longer available. Actually, I don't know if there's any Felici on the website at all. Felici is one of those yarns that they'll put up a run of colors, and then once it sells out, they take Felici down, and they kind of taunt you with it over and over again. But this was, I think from maybe 2 years ago, they had Time Traveler, and I was so excited, and I grabbed only one skein of it, and I should have grabbed 2. But I only had the one. And so if you are familiar, this is very reminiscent of Doctor Who's scarf, the Tom Baker years, of course. It's a little bit different. It's a little more subtle. It's a little more, I don't know, babyified, if you will. I don't know if that was on purpose or if they just wanted to do it that way. But once I knew that Sarah was going to have a baby, I knew that I needed to knit said baby a sweater in this yarn, and I only had the one skein. Now, I've knit this cardigan before with one ball of Knit Picks Felici, and it came out perfectly. I used every bit of it, but I had enough. So with this one, as with the other one that I knit, I wanted to make sure that the sleeves relatively matched striping wise, because it's a top-down pattern. So you cast yarn at the neck, and then you split here, put the stitches on a little holder, continue down at the body, and then you put the sleeves on individually and knit them. So I was able to, last time I knit this cardigan, do that with no problem, make the sleeves match relatively. They're not perfect, but it's pretty good for a self-striping yarn. So with this one, I had to just sort of chop this all up and Frankenstein this yarn all over the place. That's a verb now. I had to Frankenstein it. So it was a little bit frustrating. I had a ton of ends to weave in, and so the worst part of this for me is that this little neckband is so slight. So the other newborn vertebrae that I knit, I was able to make this neckband wider, which is preferable because there are no sides to this cardigan at all. All you have is the band, which is a rib. So I had to use all of my little tiny bits and ends from the yarn to kind of piece everything together, and the neckband ended up being those colors, which is fine. I'm not picky about the neckband at all. I wasn't on the other one that I knit, as long as it had the colors looking somewhat decent. I didn't care, but this was all I had, and I used every scrap of it. So I need to get this on that baby so he can wear it, because he is, from what I've seen and heard, he's a relatively big boy. So this is newborn sized. I need to get him in this and snugly. If you've never seen this pattern before, it's super popular on Ravelry, and the idea of it being frontless is that it sort of enables nice skin-on-skin contact for newborns. So, you know, I'll demonstrate. So when you lay them up against you, it sort of promotes that skin-on-skin contact. So it's a cute idea, and it's really sweet, and it doesn't use up a lot of yarn, which is also great. And I was excited to use this ball of Time Traveler for this, and it was just a little bit short. But Sarah is a knitter, and I know she'll totally get why I had to push through and make this happen anyway. So I'm excited to give this to her and baby Bennett. All right, what else do I have? I guess I'll work backwards. So that's my most recent finished object. Before that, over the summer, perhaps in May or June, I hopped on an Instagram bandwagon, which I haven't done in a while, but I hopped on an Instagram bandwagon, and I knit the Harlow hat by Andrea Mowry, aka Drea Renee Knits. I'm sure most people watching this know who she is. So this is a brioche hat. She had a knit along. I did start at the knit along, but it took me way longer to finish it just because I was also, I believe, starting my job at the time. So it took me longer to knit it, but I kind of stuck with it, and I did end up completing it, which was exciting because it was my first project that I completed in a long time. So this is a fingering weight brioche hat, so I'll stretch it out so you can see the yummy, springy brioche stitches. And it's reversible, so I actually don't usually wear it this side out. I usually wear it the other way because I'm a purple person. So usually I wear it this way, and then when it stretches out, you can kind of see the white peeking through. This was my first brioche project. I'm really happy with the way it came out. I didn't have too much of a difficult time figuring out the brioche. She links you to her tutorials, which are really great. I've watched other tutorials before, so I kind of had it in my mind how it works. It's really not that difficult. You just have to pay attention a little bit, but it's not difficult at all, and it makes such a really springy, squishy fabric. So this is 2 different colors of fingering weight. It uses very little yarn. I wish I had details about how much yarn it uses. I used to be really good about like weighing things and figuring that out. I did not do that with this. So unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly how much it used, but it was very little because these are scraps from my Saturate shawl, which I'll show you in a minute. So very little yarn. And even though it's fingering weight, because it's knit in the brioche stitch, it's still like pretty thick and plush, which is surprising. It does need to be blocked, or at least washed and laid out. I didn't pin mine out or anything, but when you're knitting with brioche, there's a huge difference, at least in my project, when I was knitting it, and then the way the fabric looked after I soaked it and just, squeezed out the water and laid it out to dry. There was a big, big difference in the fabric. It's got really cool ground shaping. Try and show it to you. And so if you're good about weaving your ends in, it's totally reversible. I think I did an okay job at that. So I'm happy with the way this came out. It's a nice lightweight hat. It's like great for fall. I mean, I'll wear it into winter as well because it's wool, so it's going to be warm, but it's just a nice sort of lightweight most seasons hat. So happy with the way this came out. This is Casual Fashion Queen. I don't know the names of these yarns because I bought this as a kit. It was the Bohemian kit. At the time, I don't know if all those yarns even had their own names. They probably do now. Maybe she doesn't make them anymore. So I wish I could give you more details on the yarns themselves, but they are absolutely beautiful, especially that bluish purple. So actually that'll bring me into my Saturate shawl, which this is the darkest and lightest shades of my Saturate. So these are actually the colors in my shawl that I'm least drawn to. And the reason that I chose them for this hat was because I had the most of them left over, and they were a high contrast for my first brioche project. I prefer the look of brioche when the colors are a little bit more low contrast, but because I knew this was going to be my first time trying it, I wanted to make things easy on myself. And I do love these colors. They just wouldn't always be my first choice to pair together, especially this side out with the more white side out. It's not just white though, it does have speckles of pink and blue and purple in it. If you look closely, you can see the little confetti fun. But so these would not normally have been my first choice of a pairing, but I wanted to set myself up for success with the brioche. So that's what I did. I also chose those colors, like I said before, because they had the most left over, because while I've completed my Saturate shawl, I never put fringe on it. So I wanted to still give myself the option of putting fringe on that shawl. And I knew that I should probably use the two yarns that I had the most left over of. And that was the start and end of the shawl. So I'm going to show you my Saturate shawl, which has been folded up for, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months. So it's going to be creased. I apologize. I need to soak this again, lay it out, and get some fringe on it. I really do want to put the fringe on it. I've been back and forth on it, but I think that the fringe is the reason that I was drawn to the shawl in the first place. And I think I've just been a little bit afraid to kind of take that plunge and wear a giant shawl with fringe. It's a huge shawl. It's absolutely huge. It's beautiful. I love it so much, and I need to start wearing it, but let me show it to you. So this is the Saturate shawl by Orange Knits, Mara Catherine Briner. Make sure I have the right side out facing you guys. Yes. Okay. Here we go. It's monstrous, and you can see all my creases because it was folded away in a tote. Don't worry about those. Not part of the pattern. It's just my folding, my lackluster folding skills. So I'm going to hold it in front of me so you can kind of see all of the color variations. This is my first color melting project. I stalled out on this several times for a bunch of reasons. Some of it was for life reasons. Some of it was just for knitting reasons, because I sort of got burnt out, especially towards the end there, with how many stitches were on my needle at that point, and how much knitting needed to go back and forth to complete a row. So because I try not to put my knitting down in the middle of a row. I guess that's not always true though, but in my mind I don't put my knitting down in the middle of a row. So this was a relatively easy knit. Like I said, it was my first time doing any sort of color melting. So if you're not familiar with color melting, it's the blending of colors. And it's basically just a creative way of transitioning from color to color that sort of makes it seem, I don't want to say seamless, because it's not, but it's just a way to subtly shift from one color to the other. So if you look at it that way, you can kind of see everything. My favorite part of the shawl though is actually the border. The border, it was probably my favorite because after knitting all of those stitches, you get to knit only this many stitches and you attach it as you go. So it's an attached I-cord. It ends up being a really beautiful edge, like just really, really perfect. It makes it look like I'm a really good knitter, but it's just great instructions and just the perfect design. So the border transitions much more quickly with the colors. I'm having such a difficult time showing you this, but take a look at the bottom there. You can see from color to color. And if you look over here, you'll see where my friends that are in the Harlow hat are. There's that blue purple and the white that I used. Here they are up against each other in the shawl. So the shawl is designed so that you have all of these little tiny holes at the end, all around the border. And that is where all of the fringe goes. And the amazing part about the shawl is that the fringe is color melted. And I find this so daunting and so intimidating that I just don't want to start it. I don't know why. I mean, if I just start doing it, I'm sure I'll be fine. But I really would like to get that going so that I can wear this and look super cool with my fringe. This shawl is huge. It's definitely the biggest piece I've ever knit. That wasn't a sweater. It's like the biggest shawl I've ever knit. But I definitely want to make sure I utilize this and that I'm not afraid to start wearing it because it's such a big piece. But I think it'll be really like just squishy wrapped around me like this. I think I'll probably wear it like this and, you know, try and make it look better. But it'll be nice and warm to cozy up in. This would be really cool. And I don't know if I'm crazy for even saying this, but if you knit this, so this is fingering weight. And again, this is the Casual Fashion Queen Bohemian set. But this pattern might be really cool if you knit it in a worsted or a bulky and made a blanket out of it and just laid it on the couch like this, on the back of the couch. I'm probably crazy, but I think it would actually look really neat, especially if you did a color melt type thing. So that's my saturate shawl that I've shown you so many times if you've seen the podcast before, but it's finally finished. So I wanted to show it to you again. And hopefully I will slap some fringe on there in the near future and you'll have to see it one more time, but I will be so proud of myself when that fringe is on. So the next project I want to show you that I've completed, I completed in February. I actually think I finished them on Valentine's Day. And they are the Log Cabin Mitts by Karen Templer, aka the genius behind Fringe Supply Co. These were super fun to make, and I wish that I had made a Ravelry page for them sooner. I'm still going to make a page for them, but I've never tried the log cabin method before, and I've always wanted to, but I don't want a log cabin blanket or a sweater or anything like that, but I've always wanted to try the technique. So here's what they look like on. I shall model them for you. This feels very weird. I feel like I'm in Talladega Nights. So they came out really, really cute. They're super warm. This is Brooklyn Tweed Shelter in the Snowbound colorway. And this is yarn that I had in my stash. It was leftovers from my Gansey wrap. Gansey? Am I saying that correctly? I just realized I don't know how to say that word out loud. My apologies to the knitting community. Anyway, this is my leftovers, and I love Brooklyn Tweed Shelter. It's Targhee wool, and it's one of my favorite yarns. I love it, love it, love it. Anyway, the log cabin mitts. If you've never done log cabin knitting before, these are knit completely flat. So if you look closely, you'll see all these little rectangles, they almost look like patches. You can see it better on this side where the garter stitch is running in all these different directions. And each of these little sections is picked up stitches and then knit. And then you turn your knitting and you pick up stitches and you knit. So they're all, you knit from the inside out, and they're all just turned and picked up in the most clever way. And you end up with a good little bit of ends to weave in. By the time it's done, because you do need to cut your yarn and then start again for some of them, but it is such a fun little like potato chippy type thing. And then you end up with these really cool squares and you sew them together, and then you do like this tiny little no big deal thumb gusset. I mean, really, it's just this little thing. Very, very minimal. So these are super basic, great stash buster. I mean, again, I used to be really good with weighing my yarns and trying to calculate at least an estimate of yardage, but I'm not really sure. But this was not a lot of yarn at all. Worsted weight came out great in the Brooklyn tweed. This is great for like that little bit of rustic yarn that you have. Not that Brooklyn tweed is insanely rustic, especially after you wash it. Once you wash Shelter, it really kind of folds up and softens. It feels a little bit more rustic while you're knitting it, especially if you are someone who is used to only knitting with superwash yarns. Brooklyn tweed Shelter feels like the most rustic thing in the world. Trust me, it's not. There are more rustic yarns out there, but it's one of my favorites. And I love the way these came out. So check out this. It's a free pattern too, which is really cool. Great for stash busting. Back in February, Karen had a knit along for them. It was a log cabin along. And I think it wasn't just for these, it was for all styles of log cabin, and people are doing some really cool things. Somebody did log cabin socks. I actually should look back into that person's Instagram and see if they came up with a pattern for it, because she was winging it and they looked so awesome. So anyway, these are a favorite of mine, and I'm glad that I pulled them out for this podcast, because now I can start wearing them again, because it's finally fall here in New York. It took a very long time for the weather to turn this year, but it's finally cool. And I live in a port town now by the water, so it's definitely chilly when you go outside into town, and I am thankful that I have these again. That's it for my knitting finish objects. I have one other FO that was a weaving project that I want to share with you. So I just made like a little, it's like a tiny little rug. I put it on my coffee table. We kind of just put a candle on it or something, and it just looks cute. It's a little like table rug. It's too big to be a coaster for sure. It'd be a huge coaster, and it's too tiny to be a placemat. So it's just kind of a little candle rug. Again, we just put it on the coffee table. This is a weaving I made out of my own hand spun. So I made this out of my one and only hand spun project that I've ever done. This was a Shetland Morit wool that I spun out my drop spindle. And this was the yarn that I had spun for the Spin for All spin along that I had co-hosted. And my apologies, and I should have addressed this in the last podcast, but if you've watched my episodes since then, I definitely dropped the ball with the Spin for All. I had a lot of things going on in my life that just sort of happened all at that moment of the Spin for All, and I couldn't devote my attention to it the way I really wanted to. I was so excited for it, and it was like just really a really positive thing in my life at the time, but I just ended up not being able to devote the time and attention that I needed to it. So my apologies for that. And again, I should have addressed that in the last episode, and I did not. But this was the yarn that I spun, and I eventually did finish spinning the yarn, and then I had this little tiny, cute little hank of yarn that I twisted up, and I just thought it was just gonna live in that hank forever, and that was it, because this is pretty rustic. It's definitely rustic. And it was such a small amount of hand spun, and it was my first time, so a lot of it's very thick and thin. I got a little more even there towards the end of my spinning experience, but I didn't really want to knit anything with it, and then I was like, I guess I could knit a pot holder with it. It's not something that I would want close to my face, so I didn't want to knit like a hat in it. I don't even think I had enough for a hat, to be honest with you. But anyhow, I decided that this would be a good weaving project. So I used my pop-out loom from Black Sheep Goods, and I made this little rug thingy. It's just a little frame loom, and it's great for quick little weaving projects. I think that most people use them for wall hangings, and I sort of just adapted mine so that I could do this sort of thing on it. I have to tell you, getting fringe to go the opposite way is very challenging when you're tying it. So you start off, I don't know which end I started off with, but you start off and you do a couple rows of weaving, and then you add the fringe, and then you continue weaving. No big deal. The problem is when you get to the top and you want to put fringe on it, and somebody probably has a better technique. There's no weight on it. There's nothing holding the fringe in. So you're tying these little knots of fringe, and they just kind of keep migrating up because there's nothing holding them down, like gravity, because they're facing the other way. They're facing this way, not this way. So that was a little bit of a challenge. You can see that my edge here is a little bit wonky. It's not perfectly straight because I'm also a beginner weaver. So this is all in all just a great beginner project. And I don't mind putting myself out here and showing it to everybody. I do like the texture of this because the yarn that I spun was so thick and thin. My apologies for the lighting right now. It doesn't like that I'm holding this up. But I really like the way the texture of this turned out. Maybe if I try it on this side, it won't freak out. I think it's kind of cute, and I'm glad that I was able to use this hand spun in a way that I can see it and enjoy it and utilize it, rather than just having it sit around in my stash just being sad, and then I can just pull it out and show people and say, look, I made this. This is a lot better for me, so just thought I'd share it with you. So that's it for anything that I have finished in the past year. I don't think I've knit anything else. I'm trying to think if I knit something and gave it away, but I really haven't been doing that much knitting. I have had the same pair of two socks on the needles for a year and a half plus, I think. Haven't really done much in the way of sock knitting. I really would like to. I have been wearing my hand knit socks more though, because I used to just knit them and stash them, like I couldn't utilize them. I don't know why. But I've been wearing them and washing them by hand, and it's been sort of really nice to dig into all the hard work I did. A couple years ago I knit quite a few pairs of socks, so now I'm utilizing them this fall. Happy about that. So let's talk about some works in progress. I have a couple things on the needles right now. I have more than a couple things on the needles, but only like a couple things that are worth showing you. I have some stuff that I've started and stopped. I still have my For Your Fade shawl on the needles that's been on the needles forever that I've shown you before. I will finish that project. I do really like it. But because it's so plain, I stall out on it easily. I am the sort of knitter that needs something to be a little bit engaging. I need to be able to follow a pattern somewhat. To keep involved, which is why I really like those log cabin mitts. They were quick, but the speed doesn't really matter to me. It's just that they're engaging without being extremely difficult. So there's that line where if it's engaging because it's very intricate, I also will stall out on that. So I've got a couple projects going on the needles right now that I'd like to share with you. The first one is a project that I had much more of it done, and I recently just ripped it back, so I don't have anything stunning to show you. But I just want to share it because I'm excited about it. I am knitting a Boyland Knitworks pattern. It's the Sapilla sweater. And I'm actually knitting the short sleeve version. So I'll try to include a photo of the Sapilla sweater because I do have the pattern printed, but I don't have it in the bag here with me, and this is going to leave a lot to be desired because really I just have the neck done. I had a good couple inches of the yoke. This is a top-down yoke pattern like a lot of Caitlin's designs are. Her designs are super popular right now. If you went to Rhinebeck this past year, a couple weeks ago, you saw Boyland Knitworks designs on a lot of people, and for good reason because they're amazing. So here's the little top of my neck. It's a little rolled neck, as you can see. This is Dragonfly Fibers. This is their 80-10-10 base, which is, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like Dejini. Maybe it's just Ginny. Maybe the D is silent. I'm not sure. And this is in the Headless Horseman colorway, which was a Rhinebeck exclusive in 2016 at the festival. And normally I'm not like the person that will jump on an exclusive colorway just because, but I really loved this. It's all different moody shades of red and like auburn and like a burnt orange. It's really, really pretty. So it's 80% superwash merino, 10% cashmere, 10% nylon. So the Sapilla sweater, again, is a top-down yoked pattern. There's a short sleeve option and a long sleeve option, and I'm actually going to be knitting the short sleeve option because the yarn that I have, I don't have enough yardage to make it long sleeves. And yes, I could just use another yarn. I don't want to buy any more yarn, and I don't have enough of any yarn that I would like to wear as an entire sweater to do the long sleeve. So I'm actually gonna do the short sleeve version, and I'll show you what I'm gonna be using for the body of the sweater. So unusually, or I don't know how unusual, but this is actually the contrast color that you cast on with. So this is going to be just the little bit of color that's gonna be up here, believe it or not. The body of my sweater is going to be in this amazing soft rosy neutral. This is Primrose Yarn Co. I bought this at Rhinebeck last year, so 2017. You know, there's like all kinds of lighting issues here, so I don't know if you'll be able to get a true idea of the color. It's a very, very soft neutral. It's got hints of blush in it, just very subtly variegated. The colors are very close to each other, so it's hard to tell unless you look very closely at it. So this is going to be the body of my sweater. Oh my goodness, the glare. I don't know what to do. So I have two skeins of this. This is her Sophia base, and this color is called Romance Novel, and it's also an 80-10-10, so 80 merino, superwash, 10% cashmere, 10% nylon. I usually don't buy 80-10-10 because, I mean, number one, it's more expensive because there's cashmere in it, but I just normally wouldn't utilize it in socks or anything, and then I feel like I'm really splurging if I get a shawl in it. But these are two purchases that I made a year apart, basically, that ended up working really well together, and they're the same fiber content. Interestingly enough, they feel really different. So the Dragonfly Fibers feels much more sturdy, and the Primrose feels softer. They both feel really soft though. It's just that in relative to each other, they feel that way. So I found that very interesting actually. So I'm excited about this. I need to get going on it. So my issue was that I had part of the yoke completed, and I didn't have any trouble with it. It's my first time doing a color work yoke, or just a yoke, period. I didn't have any trouble with it, except that I was obsessing over my floats, and they were too tight. So I need to just let that go, knit it again, just be mindful. I was trying to lock my longer floats, which is a no. That's a no. I didn't need to, and I'm glad that I ripped it apart because I went back and forth for a long time on whether or not I needed to. So what I did was I broke out my iron and I just steamed it while it was still on the needles. I just steamed like the front of it. And while the fabric relaxed, it still had puckers in it because my floats were too tight. So I just went ahead and ripped that out because it is not worth it. It's not worth it to do all of that work and all of that time spent and, you know, money on materials. It's not worth it to come out with a product that you're not happy with, at least not for me. Some people have no problem just fudging something, or I'm really not good at that. It would bother me. So I ripped it out. I went to, a few weeks ago, I went to an event at my local yarn store, which is the Knitting Cove in Port Jefferson. And she had Christy Glass come and share all of her Boylan Knitworks projects that she's made, because she's made a ton of Caitlin's projects. And actually the Sapilla is one that she hasn't made yet. I think she said she either had one on the needles or she was starting one. But it was really fun to hear Christy talk, and she's so energetic and fun, And Christy is so good at just like, you know, laughing off mistakes, and she'll point them out to you and say, oh, look what I did here. And it's totally fine with her. And I sort of admire and envy that a little bit. I'm just not that way. But I did ask her about the floats, and she said, no, don't lock them. You don't need to. And so I took her advice and ripped my sweater out. I didn't have that much done anyway. Totally worth it. So I'm hoping to make progress on that now that sort of festival season is winding down a little bit for the moment until Vogue Knitting Live happens in January. So hopefully I'll have a little bit more knitting time to get going on this. Maybe I can wear this to Vogue. So I have one other project on the needles. Again, one other project that's worth talking about on the needles. I will show you. This is actually something I'm knitting for. I'm knitting it for work, but also I'm having a lot of fun doing it. It's actually, this is the Malibu shawl by Jody Brown, who's one half of the Grocery Girls. It's her first shawl pattern. So first I'll talk about that. And let's get this going the right way, Katie. Here we go. Let me just pull it down on the cord so you can actually see it spread out. So I'm not super far in, but it's very fast. I just stopped using color A, and now I'm using only color B, which is exciting. This is an asymmetrical triangular shawl, and there is fringe on the short end. So what will end up here, but much larger at the bottom, there's fringe along this end. It's very simple. It is a paid-for pattern on Ravelry. It uses DK weight yarn. This is not DK weight yarn. This is Long Island Yarn and Farm's sport weight. If you're not familiar with Long Island Yarn and Farm, you should be. I work for Long Island Yarn and Farm. I've worked for them for about 5 or 6 months now. And we are a llama farm in Gap-Hank, New York. And Tabitha Habold, who is our owner, and founder, she makes the most beautiful yarns, and they are almost entirely camelid blends, llama and alpaca. So this is her sport weight, which her yarns run a little bit heavier than commercial weight yarns. So her sport weight leans a little bit heavier towards the DK end, which is why I'm using it, rather than going for her worsted, which would be far too heavy, because that leans almost iron. Put that a little bit closer for you. I'll talk about the colors that I'm using in a minute. We are doing this as part of the Long Island Knit Along. It's the first sort of island-wide knit along co-hosted by most of the shops on Long Island. And it's a lot of fun. So we're trying to just inspire some camaraderie between knitters across the island and shops across the island, and we're all just having fun sharing our progress. People are using the hashtag Long Island KAL on Instagram to share their work, which I need to get going on because I need to start posting about this on Instagram more. I've been I knit a lot of it actually on the road this weekend. We went to the the Fiber Festival of New England, which was a lot of fun, but I knit most of this actually while we were riding up there. So I haven't really done much on social media with it. But let me talk a little bit more about the yarns that I'm using. So this is a three color shawl. So I'm using from light to dark. So color A is your lightest, color B is your medium, color C is your dark, of course. So the 3 shades that I'm using, this light color, this sort of pale lavender color, is called Bellflower. And I don't know if you can even, maybe you can see it. I'll have to look back when I look back at playback later. But it's an alpaca blend, so it's predominantly alpaca. And then there is some wool in there as well as some silk. But it has 5% icicle. And icicle is a nylon-based material that is sparkly. So it's similar to, it functions similarly to stellina, but it's so much more subtle, and there's only 5%. Tabitha does a really great job at that because I don't like yarns with stellina in them. I think that I do, and then they're just it's too sparkly, it's too much. I mean, I think I've knit socks with stellina in them, and that's fun because they're on my feet, but I would not cover myself in a shawl with stellina. But the icicle is much more subtle, and at only 5%, it's perfect. It's just that little tiny glimmer. I don't know if it's coming up on camera or not, but it's really fun. And then the next shade here is her lavender denim. And I'll show you the skein on this because it's hard to kind of differentiate it. So the lavender denim is a beautiful sort of lavender shade, obviously blended with a more of a natural shade. And this is also an alpaca merino silk blend. Really pretty. This is one of my favorites that she does because I love purple. So I'm excited because now I'm going to be doing the section that's just that color, which is kind of the moment I've been waiting for. And the last color I'm going to do is called Japanese Violet. And this one is a little bit different from the other two in blend in that it is predominantly alpaca, but then it's merino and bamboo. So instead of silk, this is blended with bamboo. And you can definitely see in person that it has a little bit more of that bamboo sheen to it than the others do because the others have the silk instead. This is a very deep, or a relatively deep purple. I know that it's not going to show up well on camera, particularly with my beautiful blue wall in the background, which I love, but it is making this purple look a little bit weird right now. So this is really pretty. This is what's going to finish out the shawl. I have aspirations to color melt the fringe. You're supposed to use the lightest color for the fringe, which would be color A, the bellflower that I'm using. I have aspirations to melt the colors, but we'll see. So I need to get this finished as soon as possible so that we have a sample in Long Island Yarn and Farm yarn so that people can take a look at that. A note about alpaca and llama yarns. So this shawl is written for DK and it calls for a size 10 needle, which many of you will know anyway that a size 10 needle on a DK weight yarn is going to make it relatively open, right? That's not going to be a tightly knit gauge. And Jody does make note in the pattern that she likes her shawls that way, and feel free to go down a needle size or two. So I'm knitting on Tabitha's sport weight yarn, which leans a little bit heavier towards the DK. However, if you've ever knit with alpaca or llama, those fibers are more drapey than wool. So because there's some wool in there, it's going to provide a little bit more structure and support. But I did cast on with the 10 just to see how it was. It's a very small number that you cast on, so I didn't feel the need to knit a gauge swatch because for that matter, I could just knit into the shawl and see what it was like. So that's exactly what I did. I didn't do a swatch. I just started the shawl because it's such a small number of stitches cast on, and then you increase. So I actually went down to a size 8 needle, and honestly, I think I could even get away with a 7. I'm not planning on wet blocking this. I think I'm going to just hit it with some steam from my iron and then do the fringe, because you always want to, and she says it in the pattern too, you always want to block something before you add fringe to it so you don't have the nightmare of wet fringe and trying to block that out and like comb it with your fingers, or you always want to add that in at the end. So I think I'm just going to steam block mine so that it doesn't really grow on me much more. The 8 I am happy with. I could have gone down to the 7, I think. But just be aware of that if you're knitting something with alpaca or llama. They really do behave differently than wool yarns. And actually, there are fibers that I've shied away from in the past because of that. But now working at Long Island Yarn and Farm, I've gained a lot more knowledge and subsequently a lot more confidence in knitting with them. Because they are beautiful in their own right. They just are very different. So just be aware of that if you're using those kinds of fibers for any project, really. And just keep that stuff in mind. So I will try to share that with you when it's complete. I'm hoping to have it complete soon. The deadline for the knit along is the end of November, Small Business Saturday, which I think is the 24th. But of course, I need to have our shop sample done well before that. So we'll see how that goes. I'm gonna try and get a good chunk of it done today while I have the day off. So I mentioned very briefly that I just came back from the Fiber Festival of New England, which was this past weekend in West Springfield, Massachusetts. It's held at the Big E Fairgrounds, and it's a lot of fun. If you've never been and you're in the sort of tri-state area or anywhere in New England, it's a lot of, it's very different from Rhinebeck. This is a lot of very small fiber farms, family-owned farms. It's a really, really heartwarming show, I guess is the way to put it. It's very, very different from Rhinebeck. Some vendors cross over. Long Island Yarn Farm is one of them. We were also at Rhinebeck a couple weeks ago, which is a complete blur, and I purchased nothing at Rhinebeck this year. It's very, very different being there and working for a vendor than it is to be as a spectator. So I didn't add to my stash at all at Rhinebeck, which is fine because I really don't need any yarn. But this past weekend at the Fiber Festival of New England in Mass, I did snag one little goodie, actually two, but one of them is not yarn, so I will share that with you. The first thing that I snagged is not yarn related. But it is fiber related, and I finally purchased a little gnome from Going Gnome. And this is actually a gift for my partner Liz. But I'm so excited to finally have a gnome in my home because I always see Going Gnome at the fiber festivals, and I follow them on Instagram, and they just have the cutest little predominantly gnomes, but they do other felted items as well. They do kits. They run really great classes at Rhinebeck and at the Fiber Festival of New England. And I've never actually gotten a little gnome. And look how cute his beard is with the little locks. He's so cute. So I'm very happy about this little acquisition because, you know, everyone knows I really don't need more yarn, which is what I'm about to show you. But don't worry, it's only one skein. So I did get one thing to add to my stash, although this hopefully will not last long in my stash because this is going to become my winter mittens. This is Prato de Lana Sheep Farm. They're in New Hampshire. There's their logo. This is a small family-run sheep farm. They actually had the booth across from us at the Fiber Festival of New England, so I had my eyes on this beautiful gray taupe, lovely wool all weekend, and then finally I ran over there on Sunday afternoon and bought this skein. And this is their Amiga space. It's their 2-ply worsted. It's 200 yards. It's 100% Romney wool. And this wool was contributed by Abigail and Fia. So the sheep who contributed, those are their names, which I love. It's something that Long Island Yarn Farm does as well. If we have a particular animal contribute to a yarn, we always make sure that that their name is on the label. And so Prato de Lana does the same thing, which I think is really important. So Abigail and Fia, thank you so much for this wool. Again, it's 100% Romney. I've never knit with Romney wool before, I don't believe. It's pretty rustic, but it's still pretty soft. So it's got that little bit of a crunch factor, which I enjoy. I know some people don't, but it's very springy. And it's just such a beautiful heathered gray taupey color. It's really, really gorgeous. And it's 200 yards, so it's plenty to make a hat or a pair of mittens, which I originally was thinking hat, but I realized that every year I'm disappointed in the middle of winter that I don't have a super warm pair of mittens. Like, why haven't I knit myself a pair of mittens? So now that I have a nice pair of fingerless mitts with the log cabin mitts, I figured that I would knit myself a pair of mittens. Not sure what I'm going to do for a pattern. I'll have to take a look on Ravelry. I know that I want something fairly simple, but I'd love maybe just a cable down the front of the hand, or just something really, really simple. I know that what I don't want is something with a pearl background, because that drives me crazy on mittens. Maybe it's just the way that I knit, but some cables have that pearl background so that it's a little bit recessed and the cable comes out, which looks beautiful, but I just don't feel like it's what I want on my hands, because I want them to be as toasty roasty as possible, and I feel like that's not going to help me achieve that. So that is my plan for this, and as soon as I finish the Malibu shawl for the Long Island Knit Along, this is what I will be casting on. And I think that's about it. I don't have any other acquisitions. I think that that's the only skein of yarn I've bought in the entire year. I'm almost 100% positive that that is the only thing that I've acquired for my stash recently. I have a decent little stash, and I'd like to really make it a priority to work from it. In the past year and a half or so, I've made so many changes in my life, and one of them has sort of been to just, I'm trying to really make sure that I sort of use what I have and try not to get new things unless I really need them. Of course, that skein of yarn I bought is an exception. However, I really felt compelled to support a family small business, and they were just so nice. Amanda and her husband are just really, really nice people, and it just sort of warmed my heart, and that yarn is gorgeous, and I was happy to support them. But overall, I'm really trying hard to work from my stash. I have a couple sweaters quantities of yarn that I need to go through. I need to just bite the bullet and knit those sweaters and stop agonizing over what pattern they're going to be, and all of that stuff that I usually do. I need to just cut it out and just cast them on, because I used to work with a woman years ago at a yarn store in Rhode Island, and her name was Maureen, and Maureen used to tell me all the time, it's only knitting, and she was right, it's only knitting. So I need to just cast that stuff on and just go for it. So that's my plan. I'm going to try to knit through my stash as much as I can. And I really need to make knitting more of a priority in my life. You know, I get busy with work, and I just don't feel like knitting sometimes at the end of the day. But whenever I do, I'm always really happy that I'm doing it. I'm like, why don't I make time for this anymore? So I'm trying to make it more of a priority in my life again, to carve out some knitting time, because it is important and it is meditative for me and relaxing, even when I'm swearing at a pattern or I'm swearing at myself because I made a mistake and I'm upset. It's still something that is a process for me, and I'm definitely a process knitter, more so than a product knitter for sure. So that's going to be my goal. I don't know when I'll be filming another podcast. It depends on how much knitting I get done. I'd love to film a podcast again in the near future and say hello to everybody sooner than a year in between. So hopefully I'll be able to get a lot more knitting done this winter and film some more podcasts and chat about knitting more. So I will leave you with that. Thanks so much for listening. You can feel free to follow along the podcast. You can subscribe to the channel. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm at Aronitz. You can find most of my projects on Ravelry. I have knit music over there, and I will see you next time. Happy knitting!